what's important is find the smart people and network as much as you can to get in front of those folks. And then you've heard it probably said to have that lead investor helping, with that others, that's probably going to influence others toward that yes as well. Without a lead investor, it's not impossible. But what you're doing is even before you get to, where you're starting to ask for that soft commitment, you want to have a picture of what your ideal round is going to look like.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Really stoked you guys are here listening in and really excited to have Patrick Lowndes on the podcast today. We're going to dive into Patrick's story and the stuff he's working on, businesses, projects, all sorts of stuff around the world, and really excited about that. So Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ryan. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. So why don't we dig in just a little bit of your background? Because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff and you have so much value to add and you've been around so many different things and different versions of this stuff. But I think your background also kind of lends to why you're an expert in this space. So maybe you could just share a little bit of your background with what you've done and some of the capital projects you've raised and all sorts of things going on.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, it's probably good to lay the background. A very capable, lovely wife, Bethany, who lets me do any and everything that you're about to hear about. So without calling her out, and the fact that we've got 5 young kids and she's helping, again, manage and grow them while I get to do some of the stuff we'll talk about here. So I wanted to bring that up, but love being here in the Pacific Northwest. And the background for me is more out of the software industry. And started selling enterprise software out of college, and just the years of getting to know how to talk with customers, influence them, mostly remotely over WebEx and GoToMeeting and now Zoom stuff. So yeah, that has been my background in that enterprise sales process. And from there, founded a company called VendorHawk. You can read more about that on my site, but VendorHawk was just helping companies, cut software waste out of their businesses. And turns out that was a very hot topic and it's always timely for the enterprise. So built that company up with a couple of good believing co-founders through the Techstars Seattle program. And it's just, it's one of the world's largest and most renowned accelerators where they really dress you up, help you, really get sharp. And then go and present your business to investors. And so raised about a $1.2 million there. About a year later, 11 months later, was actually able to, completely by God's grace, was able to see an acquisition happen. And through that acquisition just came into some cash that very quickly the Lord was just convicting me to figure out, okay, how am I going to steward this? This is not mine. This is, I'm kind of like a fund manager, and the owner, God, just put a bunch of money in the fund and said, okay, now go figure out what to do with it. So having always been an operator, an entrepreneur, Ryan, and coming out of the enterprise software space, where I still actually work for the company that acquired us almost 4 years later here at ServiceNow. So I've got a lot of software background, but I've really gotten to know a broader amount of industries in some of the impact investing that I've done. And that's kind of given me more of an appreciation for the hard work that it takes to create these companies, especially in tough parts of the world and emerging markets. So that's just a little bit of my background coming from software and sales and product management, into impact investing. And I really love helping founders, but I also, since that company, I've also done a couple of capital raises along the way, and pretty involved in the faith-driven investor, faith-driven entrepreneur movement here locally in Seattle, as well as some international networks that support these companies. So that's a quick canvas of my background. Hopefully that was good to get the ball rolling.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I think it kind of just talks to what you guys are doing. Maybe as an additional qualifier or so, like what are some of the, maybe give an idea of kind of the scope of how many maybe businesses you've kind of worked on across the world, impact investing wise, and then maybe some of the networks and things you're part of, just for people who are somewhat aware of this space, like, oh, cool, he's connected in with that, or he's worked on this. I mean, you're not someone who's invested in 2 projects or supported 2 projects, like you're pretty well involved. So to the degree you can share, maybe a couple examples would be cool.
Yeah. So I'm directly invested in about 8 companies, sometimes multiple rounds there. But I usually like to get in really early stage. And I've been a part of some of the different Lions Den events in the US, also, on the Open Lions Den event as well. And there's just been some really great opportunities to see early stage companies in these parts of the world. So I've also been involved in, I'd say, about 4 funds. And some of them that you might have heard of, others you might not. But the main thing, kind of the takeaway here, is doing all that investing, primarily the last 4 years or so, has given me this appreciation for not only the founder's struggle in investing, but also the entrepreneurs, the investor's struggle, I should say, in developing that relationship, figuring out, okay, where should I put my precious time? Yeah, there's capital to think about too, but you'll notice from our conversation, I am not one of those passive investors. I really like to make an impact and try to move the needle in more of a sort of an active or value add type of investor into the deals. And sometimes that even means operationally, rolling up my sleeves and getting involved. And so I've been in industries, just to kind of give you a canvas, the software industries, obviously, I've helped out with businesses that are in, maritime aquatic life, vertical hydroponic farming, some agricultural, different businesses with livestock involved, all the way to, VC-backed software companies that are raising significant rounds of capital later. So just a nice smattering of, as you could tell, I've wanted to get away from just being a software guy,
Yeah. Which is great. I mean, especially as an entrepreneur, I think I know this with myself, like there's a tendency to get bored, and sometimes recognizing that. And so it's fun to get involved in different industries because you're always learning and always growing, and a lot of the pieces apply, but then there's some really cool pieces where you're like, man, we have a client in the coffee space right now, like international coffee import export, which I loosely knew, but we got on our onboarding call and I was like super nerding out on it because it was really interesting to me, and learning the nuances and the different government structures and things. So I think it's fun to get involved in a lot of things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Me as well. Yep.
So, and we'll have to talk about the maritime aquatics project. I'm intrigued to that. So we'll have to talk about that some other time. I'm just curious to know. So really then the focus of our time today that we wanted to lean into, we've on the podcast, we've done like an impact investing structures 101 series where we just kind of give some people some things to talk about. We've had different funds on. We've had Amy from Impact Foundation on to talk about stuff. So we've had a lot of different conversations on this, but the unique angle that you kind of have is you've raised capital, you've exited projects, you've been an investor, you've been an operator, you've put a lot of thought too into like your website and blog and writing on this topic and just seeing a lot of it. And I think it's cool just get different perspectives. And you're someone who doesn't kind of put all this stuff in a box and say this is how it has to be, but you're also someone who is firm in their convictions about some of the things. So I think that's really important. And so we've just, as we prepared, had some cool topics that we can touch on. We're just going to kind of roll through that, which is fun. So maybe just kind of starting, let's just assume everybody listening has kind of a somewhat of a baseline of like what capital raising is and stuff, but there's some kind of basic pieces of the capital raise. Like even as I was looking at some of your blogs that you kind of had in there about different rounds and this. So what, if you had kind of 2 to 3 minutes, just kind of share your kind of, hey, here's some core things to know about this space. Like what would be the pieces you share in terms of just the capital raise, generally thinking about that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Yep. I think a couple points to get things going would be knowing why you're raising capital and from who. The best place to raise capital is from paying customers. It's not said enough, but it's a little funny, a little tongue in cheek. But if you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, I just need to get some capital for my business, the best place to do it is go find some customers that'll pay you for your product or service. Turns out that if you just do that, you own 100% of your company, you and your founders, and that's it. And there's some of the biggest companies in the world have been built like that. But a lot of folks, when they think about, my need to raise money, they've done a little bit of homework, and I would encourage you figure out what are the types of vehicles you're interested in. Is it equity vehicles? Is it loan and debt vehicles? There's some royalty, arrangements as well. I think the things that people mess up a lot, Ryan, is they will do a little bit of homework. They'll maybe put a couple of slides together to come up with a quote unquote pitch deck. And they will quickly they'll spend more time trying to convince people that it's a good idea than they spend talking with customers who will really, at the end of the day, it's more important that from customers that this is a valuable need in the market. And so one of the things that I think that gets overlooked is the time spent in this customer development process. And so, as one of the things you'll see when you're hearing pitches from different founders is they might be looking for a total of $250,000 for this early stage round of capital, but they're talking to someone who wants to write $1 million checks on a $3 million round, or someone So you have to know that you're barking up the right tree, which takes homework. Like I literally had
and you put it in one of your blog posts, actually. Like I forget how you said it, but you said something about making it a conversation. Like don't just talk at the investor, but make it a conversation. Like it should be a two-way street. And I've seen that a lot too. Like you should get on a call with an investor and start asking some questions like, hey, so tell me more about your journey. And like, why are you wanting to invest in projects, and what interests you about this, and what kind of involved, like you can, if you're a founder pitching for capital and you can care, one, that just shows you care about the human on the other side of the table more than just the money that they're going to write the check for. But it's going to start to qualify some of those things. And it might even mean that at the end of that first 10 minutes of the investor maybe answering some of the questions, you're like, well, I don't know that we're a good fit. I'd love to share our idea and go through it, but I can't, it's crazy to me how often like those qualifiers aren't known in a project just as talking to somebody. And so I don't know, it's a really good call out because I've seen that happen so many times. And
so a great way to really just to get to know investors and to articulate your expertise in this business that you want to run is to talk a lot about customers and what you've learned from customers. And if your customer development work has turned into sales traction or, people using your product or service, that's one of the most exciting things that the examples from your customers will speak louder than any kind of, visionary slide you could throw up there, because you're trying to demonstrate that you are a doer. You're someone who gets something done. A lot of people will dream. And you hear that the idiom, ideas are cheap, a dime a dozen. It's the execution. It's the doing, the going after the idea, the wading through the customer feedback and getting to the right point, which is going to get investors excited. So I think the lack of traction and doing the hard work of getting worthy traction to talk about, that's something that's vastly underestimated in founders that are trying to go out for capital. And quite frankly, when someone says, they start talking about their industry, within the first 30 seconds to a minute, I know if they really know their industry and know how to get me leaning forward, when they start talking about, and the customers that are using this solution or our service, the first, 10 of them thought it was great, but now we're at 100 and we've got another 30 or 40 that are just about to sign up. Well, all of a sudden I'm now leaning in because you've demonstrated that other people besides you think it's valuable and they're paying you for it. And it's not something you can have out of the gate. It takes a lot of work to get to that point. But you just have to know, are people going to invest on an idea, or are they going to invest because they see a certain milestone of traction that you're talking about,
Yeah, I so I have two thoughts or two questions on that, or 2 points. We'll decide what they are. One, we just maybe this is a helpful piece. Like, we include a lot of like timeline and case study stuff with a lot of pitch decks that we do. So helping the project or business think through like, okay, what's been the history of this organization? Did you start 4 years ago and you had 3 kind of beta test clients and then that led into this, or has it been around for 10 years and like an R&D phase? I think really showing investors like just on a simple timeline slide, like this is what we've done, this is what we've been in. And then included in that, like some case study or data or some survey feedback, or really showing that. And so there's some, I think there's, what I'm trying to do with that is connect, like, how do you take that knowledge that you just shared and actually put that into a pitch deck and like bring that to life. So that's just more of a point. The question I was going to have is, so if you're an early stage project or business, what do you, and you haven't done that yet. I mean, let's just say there's a business and they know the industry, they have an idea, but they need some R&D money, they need some research money, they need to just cover some salary to go do it, get off the ground. They haven't really been in that client development stage yet, and they don't have that data. How have you seen a project do that stage well?
Well, there are a lot of very creative things you can do that cost you almost no money. And you can see if something's going to work. I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to start, and I'm just going to make something up, but like, let's just say that you want to start a hot dog franchise in a certain country, but you don't really know, you don't have all the hot dog fryers and all the equipment and the storefront. And so basically you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I need $50,000 to get my first, basic, kitchen set up and a place to maybe a few months of rent. Like, people immediately go to the storefront. Well, why not do something like a pop-up hot dog stand where you're buying your hot dogs, maybe even already cooked by somebody else. And so instead of spending $50,000, maybe you could spend $1,000 and show up in a certain location and realize that, wow, nobody is interested in hot dogs here. Well, you didn't spend $50,000 to realize that. You spent, maybe even $500 for an afternoon of your time and serving hot dogs. But that's just a simple example of try to find the most minimal way that you can test your idea. With the company I built, VendorHawk, I literally put together Word documents. Wasn't even PowerPoints. It was just a Word document, images of the prototype. But after I uncovered that there was a challenge and there was a problem from interviewing a bunch of customers, then I started to put together a prototype. So even before we wrote a line of code, we had 2 customers pay us, like check in hand, before we even started writing code, because that we could show them something that we were going to work on. We gave them, special terms. And so it might not be a software product, but for whatever the service is, or even the product, what's a way that you can kind of test the water for almost nothing? It would be and then the creative experiments that lead to conviction. That's what helps you, because you can say, I've spent $1,500 on 3 different weekends, and hot dogs I can't even keep them for more than 30 minutes. They just fly off the thing and people are demanding for more. Well, that's pretty strong, convincing evidence that maybe you should have a hot dog storefront there, but not if your hot dogs are all going bad and everyone's saying, how much of those? And like, very different worlds from a small experiment,
Yeah. And that's a super, super good, that's a super great example. It's a simple example and it works really well. So thanks for sharing that. And I love that. Okay. So kind of moving on then, like, Let's talk a little bit about soft circling. So this is kind of a term. I mean, I'm sure it's out there. You're the first person I've heard really say it, and it's a cool concept that you've kind of expanded on. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? And maybe that spurs even into like the relationship that you're building with an investor.
Yeah, absolutely.
From day one onward.
Yeah, I try to only write a blog when I've had 5-hour-long conversations about it, or thereabouts, and so I'm like, you know what, I think
it's a good strategy.
I need to make this a prerequisite before the next person asks me the same question. They have to read this blog. So going onto the website, we'll have the link in the show notes probably, but there's a blog about soft circling investors. And that term, how to soft circle investors and close your investment round. That term comes from Techstars. That they taught us this concept, and really it's a soft commitment. You want to get a circle of investors who are leaning in to the point where you're not asking for them, to in blood, hard commit. You're not asking to sign anything. You're saying, hey, based on what I've talked about, I'm trying to raise, I'll just use that example, $250,000. Earlier when we were talking, you said you kind of like to go 25, 50K checks, which is cool. And it seems like there's some things you could really add to our round, to our company. Like, I think that some of the connections you have in our industry, and even just a couple of conversations we've had, it could be really helpful. And so assuming the terms are right and everything all sounds and feels good, we can talk about that later. But just right now, could I pencil you down for that 25K? Could I pencil you down for 50K? I want to save some space in the round just for you, because I think you could be a value add investor. So you see, I'm not asking for a hard commitment. We're not even getting into the logistics of terms. I'm just saying, can I carve out a spot for you? Would you commit to that? Is that something you'd commit to? And that's something that a lot of founders have a hard time doing, because of it's scary to ask for money. But if someone is an investor, you want to kind of know the check size. You want to kind of know if they're leaning in. And if they say, yeah, no, I'm really far off from making a soft commitment like that, then you haven't really built a relationship, or you've just been misreading a bunch of signals. So in this blog, I go through the details on kind of the steps to how you even get to that conversation.
Yeah. Well, you might not be intending this, maybe you don't even want to intend this, but you're almost treating them like a customer. Like you aren't, but even just in your verbiage and language there, it was like, maybe the best way to say it is like the founder is taking control as opposed to waiting for the investor to just come along. And I think I see a lot of projects where they just kind of put stuff out there and they're hoping someone bites, as opposed to going out there and being very direct and very forward on it. And I guess I get curious about like what leads to that. And it is a scary thing. Like if you never raised capital, you're talking to these investors with all this money and you've never had a lot of money, and it can be really intimidating. And I'm wondering if that sometimes leads to a little bit of a hesitation to just be direct, whereas they might be sitting down with a customer and kind of closing a deal. And they're like, hey, so here's the cost of our engagements. And here's, I think, where you fit. And you want to set up a follow-up call? Let us know, where do you fit on that? Or do you want to go ahead and kick off an engagement? That's a lot. You might find someone that has a skill to do that and does that all day, and then they get in front of an investor and they treat it differently. So I think it's, I appreciated the language change there. And I think people could learn a lot from that.
And it's really about building that the pipeline of folks that you need to build relationships with. There's this saying that you don't want dumb money in your round. And they, some people have said, dentists or doctors or, these people that have money, but maybe they have no understanding of how to run the kind of company you're running. And if you are a dentist or a doctor and you really do like investing, I'm sorry, hopefully you do a lot of, med tech deals. But in this case here, Ryan, what's important is find the smart people and network as much as you can to get in front of those folks. And then you've heard it probably said to have that lead investor helping, with that others, that's probably going to influence others toward that yes as well. Without a lead investor, it's not impossible. But what you're doing is, even before you get to, where you're starting to ask for that soft commitment, you want to have a picture of what your ideal round is going to look like. So 250K, maybe, along those lines, I want to have 5 people at 50K. Maybe I'm going to have three at 50K and one big one. Maybe I'm going to have some smaller checks in there as well, but you kind of want to say, I need to have 7 people with a yes on this one. And so I'm going to go talk to 20 people. And when I feel like I'm getting positive vibes after the first meeting, not on the first meeting, are you going to do this, but later, you can start to have those conversations. But that's the thing is this is not a one meeting, close or anything. That you're starting a relationship and you kind of want to see, is this person going to be helpful? Is this investor going to offer me anything more than just cash?
Yeah. And that's a good segue. I mean, I could say a lot to what you just said. I'm just going to leave it all alone because it's awesome. But I think the important segue there is how, and I was going to talk about this later, but we'll talk about it now. Like, how do you get investors involved? So how do you then take that question or that analysis of, hey, what can this person bring to the table? Not just their money. How does, and maybe this goes for the investor and the founder, but like, how do both parties think about that relationship, about like what is a minimum amount to give? What is too much to give? If I'm a founder and I'm like, I don't really want someone in my business. I want just do it on my own. And I know there's that sentiment. And I know there's some people that are like, well, I want them to hold my hand the whole way. Like either end of that spectrum probably isn't where you want to land firmly. It's somewhere in between and it's never black and white. So what are some ways to kind of understand that in the relationship and maybe even some practical examples, like how you've seen that play out,
sure.
Of tactically or executionally, like what that looks like.
Yeah. And so if putting the investor hat on for a second, when I'm talking with companies, I often will start to inspect a part of the business that I know I can help with the most. So when I'm having a phone call, I'm usually not going to go into the technical weeds of how the thing was built, because I'm not going to add as much value there compared with, well, tell me a little bit about how many customers have bought your product in the last 60 days. Oh, nobody has. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Okay, how are you managing that? So I think as an investor, I will ask the questions that will kind of show whether or not I can help. And sometimes you get these amazing answers, and they're better sales folks and product marketers than I am. And in that case, it's like, okay, can I even help them? I'm not sure. So it's so for me, that's how I think about deals, or in the vetting process. If you're an investor, looking to deal with me, I'm going to ask about revenue and how you come up with that and how is it repeatable. And I go there, but, putting the founder hat back on, how do you get people involved? You need to have your sort of your list of your needs. What are the gaps that you have? Maybe you're really strong in building a product and the manufacturing or the product development side of things, and you're really good at making the widget and making it work really well. But maybe you do struggle on the sales side, or maybe you're not as good, with building a team of people because you've worked alone a lot, right? That's another thing, is team building. So you might say, like, I need an investor who's like managed and built lots of teams. So when you're talking to somebody, there's some of the initial research, like, oh, this person has been a manager and they moved to director like 3 or 4 times in their career. I'll bet they probably are good at building teams, maybe. So then when you're meeting and talking with them, you say, I would love to learn a little bit more about how to do this well. And here's the question. What's been your experience in fill in the blank, in building teams, in going to market with new products, in, getting through logistics barriers in different tough countries, or finding funding sources from government agencies? Like, fill in the blank and then let them tell you, I don't, and you'll kind of know pretty, like, almost immediately. Yeah. On that one, and you're like, okay, they don't know what they're talking about. But sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I worked in the supply chain industry, working in this market, and I've got 15 industry connections that would really help you out. Well, immediately I now have a role for you to play in helping my company. And that's the thing, finding those roles. Not every investor needs to play a role, but that should be one of your main ways of vetting. Do I even want them in my company, in my deal? Is, can they bring value beyond the money?
I love that. And again, even the way you were presenting that, it's like the founders taking control of the conversation and asking that question, which I think is just a huge shift for a lot of people, which is cool. So yeah, thanks for sharing on that. Do you have any examples of that relation? I mean, I assume, and I've seen it, but I'm curious your side, like there can end up being a weird codependency between a ROI or an IRR and an investment and getting the right return and the investor taking over and being overbearing or getting nervous about their return. I mean, there can be all sorts of back and forth. So there's also like, how do you as a founder and an investor, like protect your relationship and protect your roles while still doing, supporting each other maybe in the ways that you were just sharing? Like, do you have examples of how that's gone poorly? And are there ways to kind of protect everybody on the front end on some of that stuff?
Yeah. I can think of, I can think of one example where I was needed to step up and get really involved in a company. They lost a key person, and I had to be, operationally a lot more involved than I was used to being. So having been an operator, I was definitely involved in that. And, it was hard to create empowerment, especially when, I was helping this company from the other side of the world. Right. Because all of a sudden, if I have a stronger opinion or, as an investor, I've got more of a fluent way of talking about an issue or it's something that they need to be doing or they should be doing. It's hard to not let that power dynamic take over, the business operator's role. Like their role is to make some decisions too. So I think some ways to get out in front of that is to describe and define, hey, what would be a good way for me to help? Is it a once a month check-in? Is it is there a call that you have that you want me to check in on, something more specific? So I think, an investor can ask those questions. Most of the time you want the founder, even as an investor, I want to follow founders. Maybe that's not, you don't think about that as much, but even as an investor, I would love to be led by a leader of a business. Right. And for them to approach me with an ask and say, hey, things are going well, but I want you to give me some advice on how we're coming up with our sales compensation plan, or how we're thinking about pricing, or how we want to roll out these 2 new product lines. I'm honored to be invited into that conversation. But, being able to kind of say, okay, this might be a 1 meeting thing. It might be a couple of things. So just I think as a founder, you got to be clear about, I need you for this one specific thing, or, hey, I need you to make a series of decisions that, it would be nice if you could, and then fill in the blank. And they'll tell you, no, I can't meet once a week for the next 6 months, but maybe once a month is fine,
Yeah, no, it's super helpful. And I mean, I look at it as like, I've taken sweat equity in a couple projects, and learned the hard way of like leaving that too open-ended and then leaving it too closed, and found a middle ground that works. But I think setting those boundaries is really good. Like, hey, this is going to be a once a month call that looks like this. I'm obviously free outside of that, but this is what are you guys committing to each other at a baseline? And then anything on top of that is just like, this is a thumbs up. Thanks for going above and beyond. I think that's really good.
And I did that later on with a different work that was being done. Again, I was working on some software halfway across the world, and it was something where they needed me on these scrum calls in the morning. So I would get on pretty early my time and spend the time. And during one season, it was 5 days a week. It was before my day job every day. Like my wife was all in on it, and she agreed that it was a good use of time and stuff. But we peeled back to 3 days a week, and then we went to 1 day a week, and then it was every other week. And so it was progressively rolled off, as we came out. And I feel like that was a healthy transition out of a project where I was volunteering some time, and I went from being more operationally involved to less,
Yeah, no. And I think there's different seasons. Like I can think of projects that I've been on where it's been that, man, I was dealing with it every day for like a couple weeks, or a couple months. And then seasons where it shifts and it's like once a month, and there are going to be those ebbs and flows and as an investor putting on a hat, it's like you want to see it be successful and you want to serve that founder as best as possible. I use that word intentionally, like you want to serve them, and that can be sacrificial at times, and you've got to be careful of those boundaries and things. Yeah. But looking at it with that kind of servant hearted hat, say like, my job is to support this founder as best as possible. It is a really good approach, which is super cool. All right, everyone, I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. What if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their kingdom impact investing model, visit impactfoundation.org. So jumping over a few of the other bullet points that we're going to talk about, again, trying to figure out the best flow here. Let's talk about company updates, because I think that we've talked about like how to even think about getting investors and that whole relationship. We've talked about starting that process. We've talked about the ongoing relationships. Let's talk about how company updates fit into that. And then we can go talk about some of these other pieces. And that's another piece that we're going to, in the show notes, link a blog post of yours, I think, that talks to this. But yeah, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I've got a lot of thoughts on it. And the main point here is, as an entrepreneur, the way you communicate about your company to the onlooking larger community, investors, cheerleaders, advisors, customers, employees, the way you communicate is so, so important. I think, again, it's underestimated. And so what you're really doing is you're building, again, for different audiences, there's a kind of a narrative that you're building about what are you doing? What are you trying to achieve? And again, it's relationship based. And so when you're having, one of the first things to do, when you realize that, hey, I think I'm onto something here. I'm getting really good feedback. I'm starting to get, a bunch of, a nice longer list of people that are helping, advising. Some of them might be investors. It's good to get a company update email going. And I call it a company update because newsletter just sounds like something that you want to throw away and ignore. but company
Totally.
Updates should be more exciting and more punchy. For what is actually happening in your business. So I've got a blog of, the company updates, lines, not dots. And the lines, not dots, concept comes, from another VC that's out there that, made this popular and wrote about this. So you can read a little bit more about the details of it. But that's Mark Suster who did that, the SaaStr founder. But the point of it is, investors are looking for trends. They don't want a flash in the pan and then buy. Yeah, I've been pitched before, this nice long hour-long pitch, and then crickets, right? Maybe the one follow-up email 2 weeks later, hey, did you want to invest? And again, I don't feel like I've really gotten to know you. I don't feel like I've gotten to even trust putting money into your company. And so the company update is a vehicle. It's just this, again, you get to pick the cadence of it. In Techstars, it was actually every week, Friday, you'd send out your company update, and you'd have all these mentors that were looking at it, giving you feedback, and it involves things, related to the product or service. customers? Did you sell anything? What were your goals there? How's the team doing? Did you add anybody new? How's cash going? Do you have any specific prayer asks or even just, like favors? Like, does anybody know the CFO of this company? I'm trying to talk with them. Or does anybody have any ins on this, this special group? So it's a very practical email to solicit help, but also you are giving people this trend line of, I'm telling you what we're going to do, time elapses, and then I kind of report back and tell you, hey, I did it, I executed on it, or I didn't. And what you're doing is you're giving me a foreshadow of what could be a 5 to 10 year relationship with this founder, right? And so if the foreshadow is, consistent communication, transparency, even rawness and sharing about failures. If I see and experience that from you giving regular updates, I can start to build a trusting relationship as an investor with you as a founder. And I feel the ability to check in with you on certain things. And, so I did this for the Vendor Hawk company, that the first company I built. There's about 25 investors, but then there was a much broader list of probably more than 100 people that were kind of the community and advisors. So I'm not going to share the same information, about like how much revenue we, the burn rate and how much we're losing cash or things are going horrible with an employee situation. I might not share that with the entire community. That probably is not the right place to share that, but the investors and the board probably should know about those things. Right. And so there's just different audiences there, but hopefully that kind of gets the ball rolling.
Yeah, it's super helpful. And I think, as you're talking, I'm just running through so many companies and scenarios and businesses, and like, okay, that would work for this one, that wouldn't work for this one, or what would work there and not work there. What would you say is a good rhythm for that in your process? So you talk about with Techstars, you're doing it every Friday, and I'm thinking about projects that, like, do they really every week have enough to share? Or is it just going to become white noise in the background versus, I know some companies like a quarterly update could be good. So totally. Maybe there's not a perfect rhythm, but how would someone in your mind pick a good rhythm? And maybe that's based on their revenue size or based on like their client load. I don't know. Maybe there's some metrics that can help people figure out what a good rhythm would be.
No, totally. And I would recommend monthly when you're at the early stage. We were doing weekly updates because it was a 16-week program. And so there was
that makes sense.
There was a high intensity of every week you want to show progress because, because if you go from week 9 to week 10 and something big happens, you don't want to wait 3 or 3.5 more weeks to let everybody know or to ask for help.
Yeah. So, well, when you're in tech too, I feel like you're developing and it's moving faster than maybe we have like a product that's ready to go to market and like, hey, we're going to be working on the sales cycle. We'll touch base in a month and let you know how that's going. But realistically, nothing's changing in a week aside from, hey, we talked to these 3 new people. We don't know where it's going yet kind of thing.
And I think in monthly for a lot of earlier stage companies, monthly is, I think it's good. If you wait till quarterly, 3 months is forever in startup time. It's a long time to go without giving any updates, what's happening, to any feedback. And so the assumption here, Ryan, is the more frequently you can demonstrate your ability to learn, your ability to execute, your ability to implement feedback and make changes and to get help, your ability to kind of communicate about all those things in a believable timeline, the more that you build trust with the potential investors. And quite honestly, that same skill set is what helps you build a team, talking about where are we going? What's the next thing we're going to be working on together? What are our goals going to be? How are we performing? How are we not performing? It's the same skill set. So you could almost relabel this thing as like good leadership communication, but the issue here is really focused on creating that relationship, with those investors, even before, even after the first meeting. Just the last thing you should say at almost every meeting where you think like someone might be able to add value and you want to stay in a relationship with them is, would you mind if I maybe added you? We have this monthly update, kind of just gives a little bit about the business. Is it okay if I add you to that? right? And they might say, nah, I get way too many emails. And you're like, well, okay, maybe they really didn't like me. But a lot of people will say, sure,
totally.
Sure, put me on it. That's fine. Sure. And people can always opt out and whatever. But I've had people put gifts in there, like here's our mood, and like the funny gifts that kind of give you like a sense of, wow, they're really having a good time, or, oh, wow, they're really struggling right now. Like there's a lot of creative ways of people doing product demo gifts in there, doing pictures of their team, or, places where they traveled for customer conferences. There's all sorts of fun ways to tell the story, bring us along for the ride. Right.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I appreciate that. One objection I could see to this, not really an objection, but is someone saying, I don't really have the time for that. And you probably get that all the time. Most time when I meet people raising capital, they're like, well, I needed it yesterday. And sometimes I think that's fair and the season they're in, but a lot of times, the capital raise cycle takes longer than people want it to take. Right. That's just realistic. And so something you're talking about is the long haul. You're saying like, okay, maybe you might talk to 50 potential investors over I don't know, it's kind of crazy. Let's say you talk to 50 potential investors in a month. You're really gung-ho going at it. And your goal is to like convert a lot of those into real investors. Maybe what would you say? Like, I'm throwing out numbers like 25% of those investors might invest on the spot. And you're saying these company updates are going to maybe get that extra 75% that you're going to convert over the next several months as they're seeing the updates. There's kind of a trailing effect of that. And I think just having building in a realistic expectation for people that like, hey, you're going to talk to some people and they're not going to be in it right away. You're going to build a relationship, and that might mean you raise half of your capital several months from now, but that's okay because you're doing it the right way. Yeah. Do you have any, like, what would be some of your sense on like a realistic expectation of how that plays out?
Yeah. And again, part of this is, it's related to what is the dynamic that you're creating in your raise. So a lot of folks will say, pick a deadline of when you want to close the round by. And you probably don't want to pick it unless you think you've got a pretty good chance that you can actually command that amount of capital. So you don't want to start to arbitrarily throw out like, hey, I've talked to 6 people. It's going to be next month. It's like, well, hang on a second. Like
totally.
So, but for me, just to give, the real story with VendorHawk, obviously we're in this program with weekly updates. And so there's, a lot of interaction. People know that there's going to be investors coming after us, to want to learn more. But realistically, as the entrepreneur, you're the one trying to create that timeline. So let me just give you a fictitious example. Let's say I'm 2 months away from like desperately needing to get some money in the business. And I just this week had, 15 conversations, right? So what I'd probably, if I was 8 weeks away from when I wanted to have it, I might go every other week. I might even try to push it more on the weekly front if they were very short. And what I mean by that is like, you have some good conversations. The way I might leave that conversation is, hey, I'm talking with lots of investors. I'm going to do, and you got to be honest on this. Like I'm going to do a paragraph on, things we've improved in the business. And then a sentence or two on where I'm at in the raise, just so you can stay in touch, right? So just so you know where we're at in the raise. And you could send a pretty short, concise, like, here's 5 amazing things that we accomplished this week as a team. And oh, by the way, instead of only being, 110,000, now we're at 145,000. We only have 90 left. And then next week, hey, we only have 70 left. Hey, next week we have 15 left. Like, so you see what I'm doing there is I'm showing the urgency by demonstrating that the number is getting smaller every week. So what are you going to do? And that's when you put in the phone call and say, hey, I wanted you to know there's only 50K left. You mentioned you like 25K. That's a great time for a soft circle or even a hard, like, are you in? Like, what other questions do you have to help you move across the line? Right.
Yeah, no. And I think I know you've picked this company update strategy and this relationship, you've picked it up somewhere and learned and kind of developed on your own, but it's definitely it's a piece that like can be integrated way more often. And I don't hear many people talking about or even see companies doing. So I'm really thankful we spent the time talking on it, which is pretty cool. So thanks for doing that. And I think it really separates a business project company from the rest of everything out there, which is cool. So let's talk about some of the biggest mistakes you see, maybe 3 to 4 categories of like, these are some of the things you see founders doing when they're trying to raise capital. Yep. And it's like, man, that was a big miss, whether that's just an immediate red flag when you open the email, or it's something a little more complex, something like that. Let's talk about those a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So, the one that just really turns me off is like, completely.
I love how you just say it that way.
Yeah.
It just really turns
me off to wanting to talk to them. And I've gotten some of these from folks where they lay out, this email that's clearly, pre-written. It's just this canned thing. I mean, maybe like a phrase about, hey, nice to see you. And then boom, just dump hard into the hard sell. No relationship building. No, like, how are you doing? No, like, hey, there's some things I think you could do to help. It's just one-sided. I call it, it's the lazy close is what I call it, right? Someone shows up and they're just like, here's all this massive, 3 paragraphs, a couple of hyperlinks, we're trying to raise this much, and like the impersonal, like, should we grab some time to talk? Right. It's one thing if you already know that person and you don't have to do the small talk, but if you're coming in cold, you can't just go for the jugular on the, on the first.
I feel like that just general human relational knowledge and social skills should help you pass that.
So what I said, that's the first one is again, zero relationship, going for the close before you even know if you want my money. Like, cause again, there's dumb money and there's smart money, right? And you don't, so it's risky for you to even do that. So that's the first one. The second one is, I just maybe call them the dreamers, if that's got other meanings to it, but really folks that are dreaming visionaries, they're maybe the visionaries where they're coming to you with this great idea, but with no execution to back any of it up. I've got a really great PowerPoint. Maybe I even had a graphic designer friend help me with it, but I've got almost nothing, set up, and you can tell they haven't really done a lot of the hard work, and they don't have the experience to speak to like proof that the product works. So that's another rookie mistake, which is basically,
now I think,
it's like, show up, talk to me in a year or two when you've done something about it.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of two sides of that coin. One side is, well, you could be someone who has a lot of expertise in the industry you're going into, and that speaks for itself, right? Sure. So like, you could say, look, I've built 5 companies and exited them all in this kind of realm. I know what I'm doing here. You don't want to sound that arrogant. You want to like lay it out a little better. But the point is like, that's going to speak a lot. And, but you could also be someone who doesn't have that expertise, that maybe you haven't done anything in that industry and you're new to it or something. But your pitch deck and the research in it to where like you said, well, let me open up your financials with you. And there's a tab for everything. And it's really well thought out. You're like, we did market research here and we've got these conversion ratios baked in here. And that can go, in my mind, that can go just as far as the person who's got all the experience in the industry. Ideally, you have someone that has a combo of those two things. Like, look, I have experience in the industry and here's all the data laid out. Pitch deck has like 15% of it. And to the degree you want to go deeper, here's some footnotes and I'll hop on a Zoom and screen share and open up and answer every question. That's the perfect scenario. But it doesn't mean you have to have had that in the past. You can still prove that. Would you agree with that?
It's just, I would agree. It's what you find out, again, usually in the first several minutes of a conversation is, does the person really know the industry? Like, are they speaking from personal experience, or is it just this research study said this, and here's this mega trend here? And then if they do know the industry, then it gets down to the question of, well, what have you done about it at this point to kind of merit going out and trying to raise a bunch of capital on this topic? And so if you're at the idea stage and you're hearing me say this and you're getting a little bit, scared of like, oh, wow, he's coming down hard on these early stage companies. Well, no, you position things very differently. If you're in the early stage, you would say something along the lines of, let's say you vetted that the hot dog stand is like going to be the killer business in this market, you're going to get the first $1,500 for this. You're not going to go out with $100,000 ask. You're going to say, hey, we've got this prototype. I've done a little bit of research. I've kind of been checking things out. I've been very observant. I've been thoughtful. This first $1,500, it was my own money, or, maybe you're going to your uncle or whoever, and you're saying, hey, I'd like $1,500, just take a bet on this and see what comes out of it. That sounds a lot more like it's an unproven thing, that it's an ask that matches like the level of traction. It matches the ask. What's a really bummer is when you've got someone that's like $500,000, and I've got this cool thing that I think I know how it works, and hopefully people like it, but I need $500,000 to go see if it actually is going to work. That's not going to fit too many industries unless you're going after something crazy, so.
Would you prefer, this is kind of a sidebar, like, would you prefer a project or a business that says, hey, look, here's our 3 to 5 year trajectory. Clearly we're going to learn a lot and make some shifts. Yep. And we think we're fiscally self-sustaining, like net positive in year like 2.5 to 3, with some returns coming in year 4 or 5. And would you rather them come to you and say, look, you can give us like $500K now, and we can press into that vision and just run with it on this timeline and make those shifts? Or would you rather them come to you and say, and not have them to think about raising capital, but just say, here's the amount, you have $500K, go do it. Don't even think about anything other than being successful in the business. Don't even think about the money. Or would you rather a project come in and say, hey, here's, we're going to raise $200K this year, and if we hit these metrics, or at least have the learnings from them, or if we're on track, then will you commit to more in year 2 or 3?
Yeah.
There's so many pros and cons for the investor and the founder in any of how that plays out.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting topic that I've seen come up where I'm like, that actually could be a good way to do it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think, it's going to vary by company depending on how much you need up front. So if again, the smart founders are the ones that are able to, in a pretty minimal way, in a capital efficient way, prove out some pretty strong demand of some kind, right? For a market need that they've identified and can prove it with XYZ things. So I would be in favor of that, of more of the tranche approach, where, hey, we got a little bit of friends and family money, we prove this thing out. For my startup, the Vendor Hawk, we were, the co-founders and I put in a pretty small amount of money to just kind of try to, pick out the idea, see if it's going to work. And even that small amount of money, we didn't throw it all into the bank account on day one. We actually went in, like, every time we had to make a decision, like, okay, well, you're going to put in this much, I'll put in this much, let's do it on the same day. So like, we literally would go and very conservatively, like, bring money into the company to prove out, like, it's almost like when you bring more money in, it's a sign that you are graduating. Like, I've passed the early experiment. I'm going to move to the next step. And so I would be totally in favor of graduating yourself from that $1,500 MVP to now a $10,000 MVP, and now a $100,000 MVP. And as you see yourself graduating, it becomes a lot more believable that, he was faithful with little can be faithful with much.
Yeah, totally. No, I think it's a great answer. And I appreciate that, again, that it's not black and white, but there's some really cool things to think about for founders out there to process that kind of stuff, which is cool. Awesome. Okay. So I derailed us on the second of the big mistakes that you see.
Yep.
What you might've had a couple more you're going to throw in there.
Yeah. I think another one, just so we talked about the first and the second one. The third one I would say would probably just be the ongoing, okay, you've had a couple meetings with me, you've built some trust, you clearly know what you're doing. If you go dark on me, and there's the occasional quarterly, investor update, and I really don't hear anything other than just a PDF once a quarter, that for some people, that's probably okay, from a passive investor perspective. But if you're kind of trying to build this supportive community of advisors and investors, I really do think here's what I'm doing with the investment that you gave me, is a helpful thing, especially if you have questions, or if you rallied some of those people because of the way they can help you, and then you don't ask them for help. So there are founders that I've invested in, and you go 3, 4, 5 months, I'm like, oh, okay, I should check in here. Like, what's going on? Anything happening?
Yeah.
Still alive, right? So like going dark kind of demonstrates that lack of relationship. And sometimes it just has to, it's a process. It's your first time doing it. Maybe you're overwhelmed with the operation, but if you're listening to this podcast, commit yourself to just some sort of a regular cadence, that even if it's not good news, I mean, sharing, some people are like, oh, I can't share bad news because we haven't closed that contract. Well, your investors, you probably should tell them, yeah, we haven't closed that contract yet, and it's frustrating, and we're working on it.
Yeah.
And
and I think, I mean, you saw a deck come from one of our projects recently, I believe, where it was like, hey, here's the biggest obstacles from the past year, but here's our responses to them. And so there's a way to share bad news and be proactive about it.
Yep.
With, okay, here's what happened. Here's what we learned. And here's what we've implemented to fix that. And here's the next kind of milestone of when we're going to check in on how that's going.
Yep.
So I think there's a way of sharing those. And honestly, that's going to build even more trust with the investors, because they're going to say, wow, cool. Yeah. That happens in every business. So thumbs up, way to figure it out. Like, and if you need to, and a lot of times they're like, and if you need to bump back the payment terms of my loan, or, the timeline of return because of that, like, that's fine. This is just normal business, and investors get, so I think it actually can play to your advantage to do that, as opposed to being like, hey, yeah, we didn't really want to tell you about that. And it's 2 years in now, and we're not going to be able to get you a return for a while longer. Like, so I think maybe, to tie that up, like it might be wise to ask the investors what they want too, because some might just want that quarterly update. I have businesses where they just want a quarterly update and they're not really wanting to be involved. And then some like you that are like, hey, I want to be more involved. So I think even just asking, saying, okay, these are our 10 investors that came in on this round. Let's have an individual conversation with each one at the beginning and just say, hey, what involvement do you want to have? What rhythm do you want? And put in a spreadsheet. Like, okay, here's the 10, and column 1 is like, how often do they want to hear from us, and what do they want to hear, and where do they want to help? And just take a look at that. And maybe that's just a quick text message. It's like, hey, things are going great. Like, we'll catch up in a couple. I mean, it can be really simple, but it's just being on the same page, upfront communication. Totally is really good.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the impact stories. What do you say to different investors at different times? We were talking before we got started, Ryan. And so I think that, again, how you message about the impact that you're having is really going to depend on the audience. And, especially if you're not going to have people that are agreeing with, maybe they're not even on the same page as you with faith, and they should be on the same page of your company values and what, the good you're trying to do in the world, right? The social impact. But let's say they're maybe, from a totally different background, and they don't want to hear about as much detail. I think there's a way to talk about that, that draws people in to the bigger narrative, the bigger picture. But there's probably also some other channels and avenues to unpack that further for those that really are interested in maybe this more spiritual impact goals that you might be seeking. So it's kind of it's a big topic. I know we're right near the end here this time, but maybe
it's a huge topic, and one that, man, just even on just what you said right there, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm not even sure I want to open a can of worms on a podcast episode. So maybe I'll have to talk about that later. But I think there's a lot there. So yeah, I mean, we didn't have a total plan for today, which is kind of how we like to run the podcast. But I think a good plan would be, we just kind of wrap this up as like a part 1, and then we can circle back on a part 2 and release it, like one after the next. And we'll just talk all things impact and how that relates to everything we're talking about in that one, and go a little deeper. I think that could be a really good way to do it. But man, I've had a lot of fun having this conversation. I think it's given me some things to think about. It's I think, really valuable kind of info, and it's just a different voice and a different lens of it, which I think is always helpful for anyone raising capital. Just get a lot of advice from a lot of different perspectives. So thanks for taking the time to be on and provoke some thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's fun to do it. I'm just one perspective of it, but hopefully I've encouraged and or challenged some folks with it here today. So appreciate the chance, Ryan.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.